Jack had always dreamed of giving his daughter a quiet and safe childhood. After years of serving as a Navy SEAL, going on missions around the world, living in danger and chaos, he finally settled down in a small suburban neighborhood. The place looked calm, in ordinary rows of similar houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and kids riding bicycles in the street. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved to each other, where the mailman stopped to chat, and where summer evenings were filled with the smell of backyard barbecues. Jack thought this would be the perfect environment for his little girl, Lily, to grow up in. Jack bought a small 2-story house at the corner of the street. It wasn't big, but it was cozy, with a backyard where Lily could play, and a small porch where Jack liked to sit at night, sipping coffee and listening to the crickets. After everything he had been through in the military, the simple sound of quiet evenings felt like heaven to him. He didn't need much. All he cared about now was being a good father, keeping Lily safe, and making sure she grew up happy. The neighborhood had an HOA, a homeowners association. They were responsible for making sure everyone followed the community rules, like keeping lawns trimmed, not parking in the wrong places, and painting houses only in approved colors. Jack had heard stories about strict HOAs before, but the one in this neighborhood seemed normal. They sent out letters once in a while, reminding people about trash bins or community meetings, but they didn't bother him much. Jack wasn't the type to get involved in neighborhood gossip or politics. He kept to himself, minded his business, and as long as no one messed with his daughter, he didn't care. But over the past few weeks, Jack had started noticing strange things. Men he had never seen before were walking around the neighborhood, going door to door. They didn't look like typical neighbors, and they definitely didn't look like the kind of people who usually joined HOA meetings. They were tall, muscular, and carried themselves in a way that reminded Jack of hired security guards. They wore plain polo shirts and jeans, but something about them felt wrong. Their eyes scanned too much, their body language was too stiff. And when they talked to people, they weren't polite, they were forceful. At first, Jack thought maybe the HOA had just hired some outside company to enforce rules. Maybe they wanted to crack down on people breaking regulations. But then he noticed something that made him suspicious. The so-called enforcers didn't carry clipboards or paperwork, just thick black folders. And whenever Jack saw them talk to neighbors, the conversations didn't look friendly. People looked nervous, sometimes even angry. A few doors down, Jack watched as one man argued with them loudly before slamming the door in their faces. One afternoon, while Jack was mowing his lawn, he saw 2 of the men walking slowly down the sidewalk, staring at his house. They stopped. For a moment, spoke to each other in low voices, and then moved on. Jack's instincts, the instincts that had saved his life many times during his service, told him something wasn't right. His years in the military had taught him how to read people, how to recognize a threat even when it was disguised as something ordinary. And these men, no matter what they called themselves, didn't act like HOA members. They acted like predators scouting territory that night. After Lily had gone to bed, Jack sat on the porch and thought about it. He didn't want to overreact. Maybe he was just paranoid. He had seen too much in the world, and sometimes he caught himself being overly cautious. But then again, his instincts had never failed him before. He looked around the quiet street. The glowing windows of neighboring houses, the sound of a dog barking in the distance. On the surface, it was peaceful. But beneath it, something dark was moving, and Jack could feel it. The next morning, Lily was eating cereal at the kitchen table when she asked, "Daddy, why were those men staring at our house yesterday?" Jack's spoon froze halfway to his mouth. He hadn't realized Lily had noticed. "What men?" he asked casually, trying not to alarm her. "The ones in the black folders," she said, swinging her legs under the chair. They stopped and looked at the window like they were trying to see inside. Jack smiled softly to calm her. "Don't worry about them, sweetheart. They're just people from the neighborhood. Nothing for you to worry about." But inside, his chest tightened. If those men were looking into his house, that meant they weren't just patrolling. They were scouting. For the next few days, Jack paid closer attention. He noticed the fake enforcers were visiting more and more houses. Sometimes they knocked on doors late in the evening when most HOA members would have been home relaxing with their families. He heard raised voices from across the street one night. He even saw an older couple down the block carrying boxes too. Their car after one of the visits, looking frightened as if they were leaving town in a hurry. Finally, it was Jack's turn. One evening, around sunset, there was a knock at his door. Jack opened it to find two of the men standing there. They weren't smiling and they didn't look friendly. "Evening," one of them said flatly. "We're with the HOA Enforcement Division." Jack studied them silently. They were both in their late 30s or early 40s, built like men who spent their lives lifting heavy things. Their eyes were sharp, their hands calloused. They didn't look like neighbors. They looked like hired thugs. "What do you want?" Jack asked calmly. "We've had some complaints about your property," the taller one said, flipping open his black folder, but not showing any real documents. "We need to inspect your backyard, show regulations. You understand?" Jack didn't move. His instincts screamed that this was wrong. "What kind of complaints?" The man smirked. "We'll discuss that once we've had a look." Jack shook his head slowly. "Nobody enters my property without a warrant. If you've got paperwork, show me. If not, you're not coming in." The second man stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Look, pal, it'll be easier if you cooperate. Don't make this difficult." For a brief moment, Jack felt his old SEAL training rise up inside him. His heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. His muscles relaxed instead of tensing. He was entering the calm state he always did before a fight. But this time, he had Lily inside. He wasn't about to let her see violence on her front porch. Jack's voice was quiet, steady, and dangerous. "I said, you're not coming in. You've got 10 seconds to get off my property before I call the police." The men exchanged a look, clearly not used to being challenged. The taller one narrowed his eyes. "We'll be back," he said coldly. Then they turned and walked away. Jack stood in the doorway, watching them until they disappeared down the street. He could feel Lily's small eyes watching him from the staircase behind. When he turned, she whispered, "Daddy, are they bad?" "Men." Jack forced a smile, though his mind was racing. "You're just confused. But don't worry, sweetheart. Daddy's here." That night, after tucking Lily into bed, Jack went outside with a ladder and began setting up new security cameras around the house. He checked the locks on every door and window twice. He wasn't paranoid. He was prepared. And as he looked out into the quiet neighborhood, he knew this peace was an illusion. Something was coming. And when it did, Jack would be ready. Jack did not sleep much that night. Even though his house was quiet and his daughter was safe in her room, his mind kept replaying the moment on the porch when those two men had stood there. The way they spoke, the way they looked at him, the way they pretended to be official, all of it bothered him deeply. He had faced threats before, but this one was different. This one was happening in his own neighborhood, right outside his door, with his little girl inside. He had spent his whole life fighting in faraway places so that people back home could sleep safely. Now the danger had followed him here, to the one place he wanted peace the most. The next morning, Jack acted like everything was normal. He made breakfast for Lily, drove her to school, and even chatted briefly with a neighbor who waved from across the street. On the surface, everything looked fine, but underneath, Jack was on high alert. He drove slowly past the school before heading home, making sure no suspicious cars were around. When he returned to his street, he noticed the same van he had seen before, parked 2 blocks away. He didn't stop or stare, but his instincts noted every detail: the license plate, the dents on the side, and the man sitting in the driver's seat pretending to look at his phone. By afternoon, Jack knew they would return. He had seen men like this before, men who did not give up after being told no. He was right. Just before sunset, the knock came again. Jack opened the door and found the same 2 men standing there, this time with harder expressions. "We told you yesterday," the taller one said firmly. "We need access to your backyard. You're not in compliance with HOA rules. It's going to be a problem if you keep refusing." Jack leaned against the doorframe, his face calm. "You're lying. You don't work for the HOA. You don't even live here. I asked you yesterday for paperwork and you had none. So let me make this clear. Don't come back." The shorter man smirked. "You think you can talk to us like that? Listen, tough guy, you're new around here. You don't know how things work. If you don't play along, things are going to get messy for you and your kid." At the mention of Lily, Jack's eyes turned cold. He did not move, but his entire body tensed. "Say her name again," he said in a low voice, "and I'll make sure you never walk straight again." The men weren't used to being challenged like this. Most people were probably scared, easy to intimidate. But Jack was different, and they could feel it. After a tense moment, they stepped back. "We'll give you some time to think it over," the taller one muttered. "But this isn't going away." Then they turned and walked off the porch. Jack closed the door and locked it. He could feel Lily's presence again behind him on the stairs. She was clutching her stuffed animal, her eyes wide. "Daddy, why are they so mean? They said my name." Jack crouched down to her level and placed his hands on her shoulders. "Sweetheart, sometimes bad people pretend to be something there. But you don't need to worry. No one is going to hurt you. Daddy will never let that happen." Lily nodded slowly, but Jack could see she was scared. He hugged her tightly, and in that moment, he knew for certain this was no ordinary problem. This wasn't about lawn rules or paint colors. These men wanted something bigger, something darker. That night, Jack went into full preparation mode. He checked the security cameras he had installed, adjusted angles so every corner of his property was covered. He reinforced the locks on the back gate and made sure his windows were secured. He even placed a wooden chair under the doorknob of Lily's room as an extra measure. He'd been trained his whole life to prepare for attacks, and though this was his home, not a battlefield, the process felt familiar. The next day, Jack began asking quiet questions around the neighborhood. He didn't ask too directly, but when he saw neighbors outside, he made small talk, wanted to know if others had been approached. He quickly learned that they had. An older man across the street admitted to strangers had come by and demanded he pay fines for leaving his trash bins out too long. Another family down the block said they were told their fence was too high and that they had to pay cash on the spot to avoid penalties. None of them had seen real paperwork. None of them trusted these men. But all of them were scared enough not to fight back. Jack's suspicion grew. These men weren't HOA at all. They were criminals using the HOA name as cover. What unsettled him most was how they had mentioned Lily. That meant they had been watching his house. They knew he had a daughter. That wasn't random. That was targeted. That evening, when Jack picked Lily up from school, he noticed a car following at a distance. He tested his theory by making 3 turns in a row. The car followed each time. Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He pulled into a busy gas station and parked. The car hesitated, then drove past. But not before Jack caught a glimpse of the same man who had been at his door 2 nights ago. When he got home, Jack knew the time for patience was ending. He sat Lily down and explained to her in the simplest way possible. "Sweetheart, I need you to stay close to me the next few days. No playing outside without me. No answering the door. No talking to strangers. Okay?" She nodded, sensing the seriousness in his tone. That night, after Lily went to bed, Jack sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. He wrote down everything he had observed, the times the men had appeared, the license plate numbers of the cars, descriptions of their clothes, and the conversations he had overheard. He was building a picture, piece by piece, the same way he used to gather intelligence on missions overseas. Except this time the battlefield was his own neighborhood. Following evening, they came again. But this time, they didn't knock. Jack noticed movement on the security cameras at the back of his house. 2 figures were trying to open the gate quietly. Jack moved silently through the house, grabbed the baseball bat he kept near the door, and stepped onto the porch. He didn't charge, didn't shout, didn't reveal himself. He just stood there in the shadows, watching them on the screen of his phone as they struggled with the lock. Finally, one of the men cursed under his breath. "Forget it. We'll come back tomorrow." Jack waited until they were gone before he exhaled. His suspicions were now confirmed beyond any doubt. They weren't pretending anymore. They were trying to force their way in. The next morning, Jack decided to test something. He called the official HOA office. using the number from the neighborhood welcome packet. When he explained that men had been coming to his house claiming to be enforcers, the woman on the other end was confused. "Sir, we don't have enforcers. We only send letters by mail if there's a violation. No one from the HOA should be knocking on doors." Jack thanked her and hung up. His jaw tightened. That meant these men were complete imposters. If they were escalating this much, it wouldn't be long before they tried something worse. That evening, as Jack tucked Lily into bed, she whispered, "Daddy, I had a bad dream. The men came and took me away." Jack stroked her hair gently. "Dreams aren't real, sweetheart. You're safe here. No one's taking you anywhere." But even as he said the words, he felt a cold certainty inside. They weren't going to stop. They were going to try again. And next time, they wouldn't be satisfied with just words or threats. Jack sat in the dark living room long after Lily had fallen asleep. The glow of the security cameras lighting his phone screen. His instincts were sharper than ever. He had faced danger in jungles, deserts, and war zones. Now the battle had come to his doorstep. The only question left was how far these men were willing to go, and how far he would need to go to stop them. The police station was busy that night. Phones rang, officers moved quickly through the halls, and the sound of doors opening and closing echoed across the building. Jack sat in a small room with his daughter on his lap. Lily had finally fallen, asleep, her head resting against his chest. But even in her sleep, she twitched and whimpered as if she were still hearing the van door slam. Jack held her close, his jaw clenched, his eyes sharp. He had given his official statement to the detectives, but his mind was still running through every detail of the attack. Something about the way those men had moved, the way they had spoken, told him they weren't just a random group of criminals. They had been given orders. After a while, one of the detectives, a tall man with tired eyes, walked into the room and sat across from Jack. "You did a number on those guys," he said, flipping open a file. "3 of them have broken knees. 1 has a dislocated shoulder. None of them are walking right anytime soon." Jack didn't respond. He just rubbed his daughter's back gently. The detective sighed. "Look, I'm not saying they didn't deserve it, but I've been doing this job long enough to know when something smells bigger than it looks. These guys weren't just pretending to be HOA. They had equipment in that van: duct tape, rope, even chloroform. That's not enforcement. That's abduction." Jack finally spoke, his voice low. "I told you. It came from my daughter. This wasn't random. They knew her name. They knew where we live. Someone sent them." The detective nodded slowly. "We got one of them talking on the way to the hospital. He slipped up and mentioned something about a payment. Said they were hired to pressure certain families in your neighborhood. Most of the time they just demanded cash for fake fines, but with you." The detective leaned closer. "With you, it sounds like they had different orders, something personal." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Who?" The detective shook his head. "We don't have a name yet. But here's the part that's going to make you angry." Said the person hiring them was connected to your actual HOA, one of the board members, somebody who already has access to people's addresses, schedules, and personal information. Jack sat in silence for a long moment. The pieces started clicking in his mind. The letters, the fake inspections, the way neighbors had been scared into silence. This wasn't just thugs roaming around. It was organized. Someone had built a system of fear in the community, and they had been bold enough to escalate it into kidnapping. "Which board member?" Jack asked finally. The detective hesitated. "We're still digging." The man wouldn't say a name. He was scared even while lying on a stretcher. "Whoever is behind this has power, or at least wants people to believe they do." Jack leaned back in his chair, looking at his sleeping daughter. She shifted slightly, curling closer to him. His heart tightened. He had faced enemies overseas, who had armies and weapons, but nothing had ever enraged him the way this did. Some coward hiding behind paperwork and fake authority had tried to take Lily. The detective studied him carefully. "Look, I can tell you're the type who doesn't wait around for others to solve your problems. But I'm asking you to let us handle this. We're putting more officers in your area, and we're going to dig into the HOA records. Just keep your daughter close, and don't do anything that'll get you arrested. You've already done enough. Damage tonight." Jack gave a small nod, but inside he knew he couldn't just sit back. He had seen fear in his neighbor's eyes. They had been bullied and robbed, too scared to fight back. The police might arrest a few men, but unless the source was cut off, it would keep happening. He wasn't about to gamble with his daughters. Safety. When Jack and Lily returned home that night, the neighborhood felt different. Lights flickered on as people peeked through curtains, whispering about what had happened. Some came out quietly to thank him, their voices trembling. An older man put a hand on Jack's shoulder and said, "You saved your little girl, and you saved the rest of us too. We were all too scared to say anything." Jack listened but didn't respond much. He wasn't looking for thanks. He only wanted answers. The following morning, Jack began his own search. He reviewed the footage from his cameras again and again. He wrote down the times the van had appeared, the number of men involved, and the details of their conversations. He remembered the way one of them had looked toward the corner house when he first arrived, the house that belonged to a man named Peterson, one of the HOA board members. Jack hadn't interacted much with Peterson before, but he had noticed how the man often watched people with a calculating gaze during community meetings. Jack decided to attend the next HOA gathering. It was held in the neighborhood clubhouse, a small building near the park. When he arrived, people whispered as he walked in, still shaken by the events of the past few days. He kept his face calm, scanning the room the way he used to scan briefing areas before missions. His eyes landed on Peterson, who sat at the head of the table with a smug expression. Peterson spoke in a loud, confident voice. "We need to restore order in our neighborhood. Too much chaos has been happening. People need to follow the rules, or else this community will fall apart." Jack raised his hand slowly. "Or else?" he asked. The room grew quiet. Peterson glanced at him, trying to hold his gaze. "Yes, or else fines and penalties. That's the HOA's job." Jack stepped forward. "Funny, because a few nights ago 4 men tried to kidnap my daughter. They claimed they were from the HOA. They carried your files. They used your name." Gasps filled the room. Neighbors turned their heads, eyes widening. Peterson's face tightened, but he tried to mask it with a forced laugh. "That's ridiculous. You can't accuse me of something like that without proof." Jack leaned closer, his voice low but powerful. "Proof is coming. The police already know one of your men talked. They know it was someone on this board. And if it's you, you'll wish the police get to you before I do." The room buzzed with tension. Neighbors whispered, some nodding. In agreement, others looking terrified. Peterson's mask of confidence cracked slightly. He shuffled his papers and ended the meeting quickly, his voice shaky as he dismissed everyone. Jack walked home with Lily's hand in his. He could feel eyes on him, but he didn't care. He'd made his point. Whoever was behind this now knew that Jack wasn't just another quiet neighbor. He was a man who had survived battles most of them couldn't imagine, and he wasn't going to stop until the threat was gone. That night when Lily was asleep, Jack sat in the dark living room, the glow from the streetlight casting shadows on the walls. His phone buzzed with a call from the detective. "We got something," the detective said. "The board member Peterson has been moving money through accounts linked to those men. It's enough to start building a case." But Jack listened too. We need time. Don't get involved." Jack looked out the window, watching a car slowly drive past his house before disappearing down the street. He spoke quietly. "Time is something I don't have. They already tried once. Next time they won't get a chance." He ended the call and set the phone down. His eyes hardened. Peterson thought he could hide behind fake rules and hired muscle, but he didn't know who Jack really was. Soon he was going to find out. The days after the attack were heavy with silence. The neighborhood looked the same from the outside. Children rode their bikes. Sprinklers watered the lawns, and families took evening walks, but underneath, everyone knew things had changed. Fear hung in the air like a storm that had not yet broken. People whispered about the men in the van, about how they had been caught, about how Jack had fought them off and saved his daughter. Some neighbors treated Jack with awe, others with nervous respect. But all of them knew the truth. Someone in power had betrayed them. Jack spent those days watching carefully. He walked Lily to school every morning and waited until she was safely inside before leaving, checked his cameras every night, scanning for unfamiliar cars or faces. He slept lightly, waking at every sound, ready to fight if he had to. He knew this wasn't finished. Peterson hadn't been arrested yet, and that meant danger was still alive. One afternoon, the detective called again. His voice was calm, but serious. "We're moving in on Peterson. We've tracked money transfers from HOA accounts to shell companies that paid those enforcers. It's enough for charges. But Jack, listen to Moo. Can't get involved. We'll handle it." Jack said nothing for a long moment. Then he replied, "If he comes near my daughter again, there won't be any charges. There'll just be a grave." The detective sighed, knowing there was no use arguing. "Just keep your head down. We'll be in touch." That evening, as Jack grilled chicken on the porch for Lily's dinner, he saw Peterson's car roll past slowly. Their eyes met for a brief second. Peterson's smile was thin, cruel, almost daring Jack to act. Jack didn't move. He simply stared back, his expression steady and cold, until the car disappeared around the corner. Lily was inside coloring, safe and unaware, but Jack's rage boiled quietly. This wasn't just about threats or money anymore. It was personal. The next morning, the police raided Peterson's house. Neighbors crowded the sidewalks, whispering as officers carried out boxes of documents and computers. Out in handcuffs, his face pale, but still trying to look confident. Some neighbors gasped, others cheered softly, and a few recorded on their phones. For many, it was the first time they realized how deep the corruption had run. Jack watched from a distance, his arms folded. He felt no joy. He only felt a grim sense of inevitability. Peterson had chosen this path, and now he was paying for it. But deep inside, Jack knew that men like Peterson never worked alone. There were always others, people who helped, people who hid behind him. Later that day, the detective called with news. "It's worse than we thought." Peterson wasn't just scamming fines. He was running a racket, extorting money from half the neighborhood. People paid him because they were scared of those thugs. And with you, Jack, he wanted leverage. Thought if he could take your daughter, he'd pay anything. He didn't know who you were. Jack's grip tightened on the phone. "What happens to him now? He's going away for a long time," the detective replied. "We've got enough evidence to bury him, but it'll take months for the courts to finish it. In the meantime, you should keep being careful." Jack thanked him and hung up. He went to check on Lily, who was sitting on the living room floor with her dolls. She looked up at him and smiled, the kind of pure, innocent smile that made his chest ache. He sat beside her and hugged her tightly. She didn't understand everything that had happened, but she understood one thing: her father was always there when she needed him. As the weeks passed, life slowly returned to normal. The fake enforcers were gone, Peterson was in custody, and the neighborhood began to breathe again. People started speaking to Jack more often, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. One woman brought him cookies and whispered, "If it weren't for you, they would still be taking our money." Another neighbor shook his hand firmly and said, "You protected all of us when no one else could." Jack accepted their words politely, but he never saw himself as a hero. In his mind, he had done only what any father would do. He hadn't fought for recognition. He had fought for Lily. One evening, Jack and Lily sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lily leaned against him, her small voice soft. "Daddy, are the bad men gone forever?" Jack looked at her and smiled gently. "Yes, sweetheart, they're gone. And even if more bad men ever come, Daddy will always be here. You don't have to be afraid." She nodded and rested her head on his shoulder. For the first time in weeks, Jack felt her relax completely. That night, when Jack put her to bed, he stood by her door for a long time, watching her sleep peacefully. He thought about all the battles he had fought in his life, all the missions he had survived. None of them had meant as much as this. Protecting his daughter was the only mission that truly mattered. Months later, when the trial finally came, Jack sat quietly in the back of the courtroom. Peterson looked thinner, weaker, no longer the smug man who had smiled at him from his car. Witness after witness spoke, neighbors who admitted they had been bullied and forced to pay fake fines. Evidence was shown, recordings, documents, everything tying Peterson to the crimes. When the judge finally declared the guilty verdict, a quiet cheer went through the courtroom. Jack didn't clap or cheer. He just stood up, walked out, and breathed. Deeply of the fresh air, justice had been served. Back in the neighborhood, things slowly began to heal. The HOA was reorganized with honest people in charge. The fear that had once hung in the air was gone. Children played freely again. Neighbors talked openly. And the shadow that Peterson had cast finally lifted. But Jack never forgot. He never let his guard down completely. He still checked the locks twice before bed. He still kept his cameras running. He still walked Lily to school every day. Not because he was paranoid, but because he knew the truth of the world. Evil didn't disappear. It only waited for a chance to come back. And when it did, he would be ready. On a warm summer night, as fireflies blinked in the yard and Lily laughed while chasing them, Jack sat on the porch and watched her. His face softened into a rare smile. He had given everything in his life to protect his country, but now his world had narrowed to one small girl with bright eyes and an endless laugh. She was his reason, his anchor, his purpose. And though the neighborhood would remember him as the man who broke the fake enforcers and brought down the corrupt board member, Jack didn't care about the stories people told. He only cared about the promise he had made silently to himself the day she was born. No matter who came, no matter what danger arrived, no one would ever take his daughter from him. It was a calm afternoon when it finally happened. Jack was in the garage, fixing a few tools and cleaning up some shelves. Lily was in the front yard, sitting on the grass with her dolls. The sun was shining, and the street looked peaceful. Children's laughter could be heard from a few houses down, and a neighbor watered his flowers across the street. Everything felt ordinary, but Jack never let his guard down. His instincts had been buzzing for days, warning him that the men would come back. He had prepared, but even he did not expect how bold they would become. The sound that made his blood run cold was not loud at first. It was Lily's giggle turning suddenly into a sharp scream. Jack froze for a split second, then dropped the wrench in his hand and sprinted out of the garage. His eyes scanned the yard, and what he saw made his chest tighten with rage. A white van had pulled up fast and stopped right in front of his house. The side door was open, and two of the fake enforcers were there. One of them had grabbed Lily by the arm and was trying to drag her into the van. The other stood by the door, shouting for the driver to hurry. Lily was kicking and screaming. Her doll dropped on the ground, her small arms flailing against the man's tight grip. Jack's body reacted before his mind had even finished processing. Years of training came back instantly. His legs pushed off the ground with explosive speed, and he crossed the yard in seconds. His voice boomed with a roar that stopped everyone in place. "Let her go." The man holding Lily glanced up, startled. But he didn't let go. Tried to shove her into the van quickly. That was his mistake. Jack reached them in a flash. His fist came down hard, striking the man across the face with the force of a hammer. The man's head snapped back, and he collapsed to the ground, releasing Lily. Jack grabbed his daughter with one arm, pulling her close to his chest. She buried her face into him, sobbing in fear. He pushed her behind him gently and turned his full focus on the others. The second man lunged forward, trying to punch Jack, but Jack was already moving. He sidestepped and caught the man's arm, twisting it in a way that made a sickening crack. The man screamed, his knees buckling, and Jack slammed him against the side of the van before kicking him to the ground. The driver of the van jumped out, holding a metal pipe. He swung it at Jack with all his strength, but Jack ducked low, grabbed the man's leg, and yanked it out from under him. The driver fell flat on his back, and Jack didn't waste a second. He stomped down on the man's knee with controlled precision. Another loud crack filled the air as the man screamed in agony. Neighbors had started to come outside now. Hearing the commotion, gasps filled the air as they saw what was happening. Some people froze, shocked, while others grabbed their phones and began calling the police. Children were pulled inside houses quickly by frightened parents, but Jack wasn't finished. Another enforcer jumped out of the van from the passenger side. A heavy-set man who thought his size would give him an advantage. He rushed at Jack, swinging wildly with both fists. Jack dodged the first swing, blocked the second with his forearm, and drove his elbow into the man's jaw. The man staggered, but Jack didn't give him time to recover. With smooth, practiced movement, Jack grabbed the man's arm, bent it backward, and forced him onto the ground. He placed his knee on the man's back, pinning him down effortlessly. "You picked the wrong house," Jack growled into his ear. The man struggled, but quickly realized he was trapped.
"Back."
Jack applied more pressure until the man cried out in pain. His arm nearly breaking under the force, the first man, the one Jack had punched in the face, was crawling toward the van, trying to escape. Jack released the pinned man with a shove and marched toward him. He grabbed the man by the collar and yanked him upright. The man's nose was bleeding, his eyes wide with fear. "Why, my daughter?" Jack demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The man stammered, We just needed leverage." Jack tightened his grip. "Who sent you?" The man whimpered, but before he could answer, the driver groaned loudly from the ground, holding his shattered knee. "Don't tell him anything," the driver barked, even through his pain. That was enough for Jack to know. There was someone else behind this, someone who had ordered these men to target his family. His anger burned hotter than ever, but he also knew he had to protect Lily above all else. He turned his head slightly and saw her standing by the porch, clutching her doll again, tears streaking her face. She was safe for now, but she had seen too much. The sound of sirens began to echo in the distance. Neighbors pointed down the street. As police cars raced toward the scene, the men on the ground were groaning, clutching broken knees and twisted arms, completely unable to fight back. Jack stood tall, breathing heavily, his fists clenched, his eyes still locked on them. When the police arrived, they were stunned by what they saw. Four men lay on the ground, all injured, unable to move. A white van sat with its door open, proof of the attempted kidnapping. Neighbors crowded the sidewalks, some recording with their phones, others explaining frantically what had happened. An officer approached Jack carefully. "Sir, what happened here?" Jack's voice was steady, though his anger still simmered beneath the surface. "They tried to take my daughter. I stopped them." The officer looked at Lily, who was clinging to her father's leg, still crying softly. Then he looked at the injured men and shook his head. "Looks like you did more than stop them." Jack didn't respond. He kept his hand on Lily's back, comforting her, his eyes never leaving the men who had dared to touch her. The police quickly handcuffed the attackers, even though some of them could barely move. Medics arrived to treat their injuries, but Jack knew those injuries would stay with them for a long time. Broken knees, dislocated arms, none of them would forget. The day they tried to take a Navy SEAL's daughter, as the van was searched, more evidence came out. Inside were ropes, duct tape, and even a folded map with Jack's house marked on it. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. This was no misunderstanding, no mistaken identity. This was a planned kidnapping. One officer turned to Jack. "Sir, you and your daughter need to come down to the station to give statements. We'll also need to arrange protection until we figure out who's behind this." Jack nodded, though inside he was already forming his own plan. He didn't trust anyone else to keep Lily safe. He had done it his whole life, and he wasn't about to stop now. That night, after everything settled and the police left, Jack sat on the porch with Lily sleeping in his arms. The street was quiet again, but it didn't feel like the same neighborhood. Anymore, he had seen the truth.
Ow.
The men were only the front line. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone who thought Jack would be an easy target because he lived a quiet life. They had made a mistake. They had seen a calm father, a man who mowed his lawn and waved at neighbors. But underneath, Jack was still the Navy SEAL who had survived battles all over the world. They had tried to take his daughter, and in doing so, they had awakened the part of him that had been sleeping. Jack kissed Lily's forehead gently as she slept. He whispered to himself, "You'll never be taken from me, not while I'm alive." And as the night grew darker, Jack knew this was not over. The men had failed, but whoever had sent them would not stop. The fight was only beginning, and Jack was ready.